and as far as Baalbek goes, that's one interesting thing that Dan and I connect on is that I think that there was a lost ancient technology. And I always say this, it doesn't have to mean Wi-Fi and space lasers. Technology, like a saddle on a horse is technology. Anything used as a tool is technology. However, the evidence appears that the Romans simply did not construct the foundation of the Heliopolis at Baalbek. And I consider Baalbek to be, besides the Great Pyramid of Egypt, if there was one site on Earth, I would say on top of the Great Pyramid, more so than the Great Pyramid. Pyramid is just... I think the Great Pyramid was a lost functional technology, but let me backburn that for half a second and say that Baalbek is a more significant example from the standpoint that it was alleged to have been constructed by the Phoenicians and the Romans, but there's a complete lack of evidence. In fact, the evidence that it does exist there would suggest that it just wasn't them, is that they did not have the capability to move, lift, and stack those 3 trilithon stones, which are 900 tons apiece. Insane. And what's interesting about Dan is that you've pointed out that, like, for example, people will often use the Thunderstone, the bronze horseman in Russia, which was like some 1,500 tons, and for them to have moved and lifted it in the late 18th century, late 1700s, they needed the screw jack, they needed advanced iron rails, metallic ball bearings, things that the Romans did not have. And it's like, so there's like this ground that we share, which is that you might not think that it was some lost technology, but it clearly was done with a method that is completely unknown to the Romans. And I mean, correct me, how do you feel about that?
No, I would say that it would be a lost technology, but it wouldn't be. I wouldn't consider it a high technology. I wouldn't consider it power. Like I don't think they had like power, but.
You don't think the ancient civilizations that were around during the pyramids had power?
I don't think they had like electricity and shit like that necessarily. Not like any. I don't think they were using steam power to lift big rocks.
So how do you think they cut those giant stones?
I'm not really sure, to be honest with you.
Let me ask you this: what is the reason you think they didn't have power?
Because we have nothing of it in the record except for a few things that can be done in other ways. Except there's a few exceptions, but like most big rocks, we can look at and say, okay, it would take a long fucking time, but we could eventually cut that. So you can't, in my opinion, it's like, if I could cut this with a spoon, right? This piece of wood, and it's going to take a long ass time. But if you came in here and it was cut in half and the only tool available is a spoon, and you say, well, did you do that with the saw? If I got no saw here, man, you got no saw on the record. I could do it with the spoon. But there are times when you can't do it with a spoon, to follow that metaphor. And like at Baalbek, for example, like Jim was saying, we did need more tech than that to move a big rock like that. And furthermore, the stones at Baalbek, the 3 that are still in the ground, to me, that betrays the fact that the Romans gave up. It's like, you've got 3 in the wall already. Why are there 3 more in the ground that you didn't take out? The 3 in the ground.
The pregnant stone, whatever it's called.
Yep.
And those 3 in the ground all show signs of being measured with the Roman foot. The 3 in the wall do not show signs of being measured with the Roman foot. So that to me is, and Romans built with symmetry. So you got 3 stones here, we're going to put 3 more over here, quarry those things, and the guy's tasked to move them, look at it, and say we can't.
Yeah.
I will say real quick about Baalbek, as far as cutting the stones, those are limestone, and I have no doubt that they could cut limestone with primitive methods. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. When it comes to Egypt and the granite, a whole different ball game. Yeah. But when it comes to Baalbek, we're talking, again, 3 900-ton stones that were moved approximately a half mile and then lifted and stacked some 30 feet off the ground. And that becomes a matter of physics, like physics defying that say. Let me be clear, we could do that today, absolutely. Mm-hmm. But what it takes for us to do that today is magnificent. Mm-hmm. Like when they moved, I like to use this example, which is that the largest stone in modern times is the 340-ton stone that's at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And to move it 104 miles, it took a year of planning. It cost $10 million, and they had to custom build a trailer truck around it. Steve, this would be great photos if you're able to bring it up, because this trailer truck they built around it is 260 feet long, 30-something feet wide, 44 axles, used 198 semi-truck wheels.
Jesus Christ.
And they moved it. It took 9 days. They moved it at 4 miles an hour. They had to go around certain roads because roads couldn't even withstand the weight of it. And this is to move into, so that stone is 1/3 the weight of the trilithon stones, or at least of the Ramesseum statue, which is 1,000 metric tons. Let me say that.
Third. That's impressive.
And that's where like, like to go back to the cutting of the stones, like the cutting is something we can achieve. There are certain things you can throw more man and time at and eventually achieve. Stacking blocks on top of each other, as long as the blocks are something people can move, you can stack them on top of each other. But like the stones at Baalbek, they are so big that you can't, there's no ropes or anything. With what we've done in history, there's really no way of moving those things with the technology at the time that I've seen. And I've seen the debunkers come at it, and they always skip the parts that are difficult. And there's some things you can't just throw more men and material at. I frequently just to slide down the slope with people that just try to say you could just throw more men and material at it. How much GDP would the ancient Egyptians have had to throw to get to people to the moon? It would have cost, they couldn't. They didn't have the fucking means.
There's some great photos of it.
That's insane.
Yeah, could you imagine that?
How many tons was this thing?
340.
Jesus.
300, which is how many pounds? Holy cow, dude.
A ton is 2,000 pounds, so that would be 340 times 2.
So 700 something thousand pounds.
Yeah.
So
almost 1 million pounds.
And so meanwhile, you have the trilithon stones that are 1.75 million pounds. And so what's interesting is that the Romans, their largest, most powerful crane could lift 6.6 tons, which means that you would need approximately 130 something of those cranes to lift just one of those trilithon stones.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's not space to do it. You couldn't coordinate, not feasible.
The only way I would think that you might be onto something with there wasn't any kind of electric crazy power saws or anything like that is when you see videos from that guy, Wally Wallington.
Yeah.
Who's moving those stones basically like with these little wooden wedges and things and like balancing them properly. Like if you could understand the math and the balancing and all and the physics of moving these stones and using gravity to help you, I think that could be an explanation if they had some sort of super advanced understanding of mathematics.
Right. Which I would think they would.
Yeah. And not only that, I talk about this one every now and again, but stones was up until the Metal Age, man, until the Bronze Age, stone was the premier building material, and not just for humans, but for hominids. I mean, this goes back millions of years, where people were working with stone to make every tool, every weapon that they had. So to think that they didn't have some tricks to work with stone that we've lost since they started working in metal, that's, I mean, to me, that's insane.
Now, let me say this about Wally Wallington, because that guy is a genius. Like that, what he accomplished to move those 20-ton stones is brilliant.
Yeah.
But my pushback on it is that he did it on a concrete foundation. He also used water. He needed a hose to do it. He used pressurized water. So I'm like, when I look at the 80-ton stones,
to do what? To cut them?
So he would basically like use the water to have the sand below it fall apart, and then use it to shift the weight. And so when I look at the 80-ton stones, the largest stones that were used to construct the Great Pyramid, they were moved some 500 miles and then lifted and stacked a couple hundred feet above the ground. I'm like, Wally Wallington's method, although brilliant, wouldn't be feasible for that explanation.
Yes. I completely agree with you.
Okay.
There. That's where it's one thing to say that they would have been able to put one Wally Wallington on a site and have him maneuver the block right into place. I can go with that. Getting it through the jungles, up and down hills. Yeah, come on now.
And to get it up elevated that high too, right?
Exactly.
Now, let me also say this, because the devil's advocate, people listening, be like, well, they moved them on barges, Jimmy, you dumbass. I see it all the time, and I'm like, well, the largest Egyptian barge couldn't move a fraction of that weight. Now, like, well, they had larger barges, and I'm like, okay, it's not in the record. And not only that, the physics of moving it on and off that barge is no little thing. Like, we're talking center of gravity. Like, that's a thing.
Oh yeah.
So
even I had Ed Barnhart on here a couple months ago, and he was explaining to me how the size of the conventional explanation for those Olmec heads is the archaeologists believe that they moved them on barges through the rivers. And he was saying in order to build a raft big enough to float one of those Olmec heads, it would have to be like 4 times wider than the river itself. So he completely thinks that conventional explanation is bullshit. And he's an academic archaeologist.
yeah, I want to go visit the Olmec heads. That is like I haven't done a deep study on ancient Mexico. But the more I'm looking into it, I'm like, oh, there's something here. Those Olmec heads being with the largest 50-something tons moved approximately 60 miles or almost 100 kilometers.
Oh, yeah, it's insane.
Through jungle and marsh
Crazy
and swamp.
jungle.